Today is Monday, June 22nd, 2026, and you have found the Living Youth Podcast. My name is John Robinson, here again. Not as always, but 99% of the time.
That's right.
Podcast co-host, Mr. Wallace G. Smith. Mr. Smith, what is our topic today?
All right. Our topic today is, I think, one we're concerned about making sure we get right. You know, in the United States, I did look at one resource, and therefore I don't know that's accurate. I didn't do a whole lot of fact checking, but it seemed accurate. It suggested that the behavioral health market is expected to grow around 50% in the U.S. in the next 9 years, as in people looking for therapy, things like that. Right now, it's like about a $100 billion industry. And in 9 years alone, it's expected to grow to about $150 billion. You have all these influencers. We were talking right before we started that you've heard some on podcast. I've definitely heard some ads on videos we watch on YouTube. Will tell us that we need therapists. We've got to go find therapists. They point us to apps. I've seen this one that you buy the app, and of course they get commission. They're trying to support their channel. You get the app, and it gives you this kind of anonymous, hey, you can talk to a therapist. And if you don't like that one, you just kind of like swiping left or right. You can find another therapist. That therapy is what you need to fix your messed up life. That's just sold to us pretty aggressively. I think increasingly aggressively. And especially with things like apps, it's like it's lowering the bar to make it less intimidating. And it's less personal. It's over your phone. You don't got to talk to your parents. You don't got to talk to somebody else. And again, if you don't like it, you just switch and find somebody else. Well, Mr. Robinson and I recently read an article by I think he's a licensed therapist. I think it says that he's a licensed therapist. He is a psychotherapist. That's what he's listed as. Read an article, and he is in dismay about the state of his profession, saying it does more harm than good in many instances. And his comments got the two of us thinking more about what the Bible has to say about what I'm going to call, and may not be the best name, but therapy culture around us that we see in the West, at least in the United States. Because I think it goes, even though he was focused on therapists, I think it goes far beyond that. You and I and our listeners may never see the inside of a therapy room, but what he's talking about is a cultural shift. So we thought that we would talk about what does God have to say in terms of healthy minds operating in an unhealthy world. So today we're going to talk about that. Welcome again to the podcast. And before we launch into today's topic, we do need to say here at the very beginning at least two important things. One, we are not saying that getting help is a problem. In fact, Mr. Robinson joked during the little break. He said, so what you're saying is you hate therapy and getting help. No, many people do not seek help when they should. And I'm not just talking about professional help. I think we'll make that really plain. We'll elaborate that in some other points. That is reaching out to people that God has given us in our life. God designed us to be communal beings. That is to live here amongst other people, family members, friends, the broader church, other people that we know. That's how God designed us, and we should be willing to reach out. There's a passage in Ecclesiastes that I had noted on that point that I will go to, Mr. Robinson. Here we go. I've gone there. I'm there. Ecclesiastes chapter 4 and verse 9. It says, for two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him up. Again, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one be warm alone? Though one may be overpowered by another, two can withstand him, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken. That's often the one we remember. When I looked it up, that's what I was looking for. So, but notice the theme of that, and we'll come back to that too. It's about overcoming. It's about one helping the other and then overcoming whatever the obstacle is. We'll come back to that. But as for the second thing, we're going to let Disclaimer Guy cover that. Disclaimer Guy, go.
Listening to the faceless voices of two ministers on a podcast is no substitute for a friendly relationship with your local ministry. It is, however, a good substitute for 87% of modern popular music.
Thank you, Disclaimer Guy. And I would add to that your family as well. The fact is, God has given us people in our lives, and these people know you, they see you, they talk with you, some of them live in your house, they interact with you, every Sabbath or every other Sabbath or so. Not the two of us. And so you do need to be involved and get advice from those people that actually know you and can work with you. The two of us are no substitute for those people. So do keep that in mind. However, we do talk about spiritual truths here, and that is exactly what we're going to do today. So, Mr. Robinson, the article that I sent when I'd come across it, and I'm so grateful you thought it was interesting as well, because I did. I read this. I'm not a therapist, and I'm not familiar with therapists. Other than, I guess, was Jordan Peterson ever an actual? He was a therapist. Yeah, he actually was. Yep. But it was an article in the Free Press, and the writer's name was Jonathan Alpert. And this was a fairly recent, I don't have the date on me, but it was fairly recent. And his title, though, really got my attention. It was, "Is Therapy Tearing Us Apart?" And I thought, well, okay, here's a therapist who's asking a question like this. I am going to read it and see what he has to say. And I'm very grateful that you also thought it was a helpful article.
Yes.
So you thought it was insightful?
Well, it was quite interesting because here's what I feel like I've learned over the last 10 years. Once I understand what a clinical therapist does and like the rules they go by, if you will, like how they practice what they practice, I was like, wow, that's kind of amazing. That's ideal, because especially in church culture, sometimes the idea of therapy can really be looked down upon. And really, a clinical therapist is somebody, if they're a good trained one, and their goal is to help you out, man, they help you figure out what the problem is, help you, admit that there's what the problem is, because sometimes it's funny how it reminded me of the Alcoholics Anonymous saying, you have to admit that you have a problem.
Right. You can't do anything else after
define
that, right?
what it is. And they go through this whole process where they really help you take this journey to being realistic about what the problem is, so you can start doing things about it. So this guy was in no way anti-therapy at all. But it seemed like, if I was just to very simply summarize what he was saying in this article, is the problem increasingly that he's finding with many therapists is they're not helping people try to reach this, hey, where are my problems, and what is my part to play in it, and how can I fix it? They're kind of doing the opposite. I know you're going to read some excerpts from it that'll explain it better than I can, but his message when I read the article, like, it tracked. Like that sounded right, and it's what he's not liking as therapists, not helping people figure out what the problem is, and kind of just agreeing with you and just saying, yeah, you're right, your boss is toxic, you're whatever, or just everything, and it starts to create a mentality where you're not the problem, everything else is the problem.
Right. See, that's the impression that I got from his article. He wasn't anti getting help or therapy. If anything, he thinks there is a real place for good therapy, but he sees the way. At least, and we're having to rely on him because we're not out there investigating what the colleges and universities are doing with their therapists. But he takes a look at how they're being trained today, and he sees a very dangerous shift. He believes that therapy at its best should help people face reality, examine themselves honestly, build resilience, take responsibility. But when it comes to modern therapeutic culture, there's been a shift towards an over-focus on validation, on grievance, on understanding where blame really belongs. And he sees a lot of therapeutic language has been introduced into our culture, and people are using that to describe their pain, but the end result of it is not actually a more robust people. It's people that are just as fragile, if not more fragile. They're more self-protective and less willing to endure conflict or ambiguity or self-correction or any of that. It's the opposite in his understanding of what therapy is supposed to do. Now, here's what I thought was really fascinating, because we're not here to talk about actually therapy today, even though we're talking about, for the lack of a better word, we'll talk about therapy culture. I'm talking about the culture at large. But to me, what I saw was that, one, it was very believable what he was saying, but it wasn't believable because I'm familiar with therapists. It's believable because I just look at the culture around us. What I see in our culture is exactly this kind of shift. Mr. Robinson, I don't know. I mean, I have never seen the inside of a therapy room. I don't know if Mr. Robinson ever has. I'm not going to ask. I don't know if you have. you can tell us if you want, because we have a microphone in front of us and no.
Well, I've been married to a clinical therapist for the last 30 years. Yeah, imagine my surprise early on when she didn't agree with my worldview and
That's so funny.
thought maybe I should consider some other things.
No, maybe not certified. Certified in one particular patient, I think. You have to have an expertise like that. But what I've seen is in the culture in general, this exact kind of shift, not just in, say, what was happening in a therapist room, but what I'm seeing on the news and in social media and just cultural talk amongst regular old human beings. And so to me, it's irrelevant about what therapy is doing in terms of the professional shift. I'm happy to assume that he's right. I feel like the shift he's talking about has taken place outside of that realm, and it's actually a part of the fabric of our culture and society. So even if all of our listeners and stuff, even if we're never going to see the inside of a therapist room, I believe we're exposed to a world. It's almost as if society is trying to counsel us to take on the kinds of things that he's talking about.
Well, so one of the other things it made me think about, by the way, I want to repopularize this saying, which is the more things change, the more they stay the same.
You want to repopularize that?
Yeah, I want to repopularize that. Because really, if you step back and think about it, it's just still that from the beginning of the Garden of Eden, the mentality and the way of Cain. Where humanity has long struggled with wanting to really own things, admit to things, agree that maybe that wasn't the best decision. We want to make excuses for our behavior. It's just rampant. And so to be here at the end of the age to still see that kind of thing going on, just using different words and maybe coming at us in a different way. But it's still the same mentality that started a long, long time ago.
Yes, and I feel like we're seeing it because at least you used to have, say, voices of reason in the world to say, well, that's crazy, and their microphones were larger than the others, but it doesn't seem like it's that way anymore. It seems like we have a society that is intent on teaching you. Now, I say teaching you. Doesn't mean they're literally telling you, hey, Bob or Jane, listen to me and do this, but it doesn't make a difference. Your brain is designed to absorb the culture around you and to take it in as examples, and especially if you have a young mind, your mind is trying to figure out how the world works based on what it sees and based on the language it sees, based on what your teachers might do or your professors. And it teaches us, it all works together to teach us to see our problems as, like Ms. Robinson's talking about, almost 100% external. And then that gives you permission not to examine yourself to see what you might contribute to things like this or to the problems, or even encouraging you to notice, well, I may not be contributing something, but perhaps I can still change and grow in such a way as to deal with it. Instead, it says, no, you don't, the world doesn't have a right to obligate you to change, In fact, don't change. You build up a wall and try to find a way to stay exactly the same.
Yeah. Well, so just imagine, so you go back to Cain. I have to give him credit again. Jordan Peterson's right. That is such a brilliantly written section of Bible. It's very short, but it's very compact. Like there's a lot you can get out of it.
And we're not saying that it was written like a story. These are actual events that actually happened. But that's part of what I think about that God was wise enough to kind of, if you really look at the beginning of mankind, he allowed all these circumstances to be so archetypical of what we would expect for the rest of humanity.
It's like this compact little story that when you expand it, you're like, I can't believe you can get that much out of it.
Yeah.
I appreciate you saying that. I actually consciously try not to refer to biblical examples as stories, because then it seems like it's made up. But
account. I've tried to use the word account, the biblical account. Right.
So you have Cain. It's clear that he's increasingly frustrated and really grumpy about what's going on or what he sees around him. God recognizes that, approaches him, and actually gives him good therapeutic advice. Hey, you got this problem. It's really bubbling up. It's on the verge of really exploding into something that you're not going to recover from. Consequences that you're not going to easily get over. And look, but you can get a hold of it. You can master it. If you do well, you'll be accepted. And then I was just now thinking, like, what if he came in like a modern clinical therapist who was more affirming in their care and be like, you know what? You're right. Your brother is a little goody two shoes, isn't he? And the advice is the opposite. Listen, it's not your fault. It's understandable that you're upset, and
Right. You're doing your best, and the world needs to give you space, to find yourself and to find your way. That's right.
Of course, that's hyperbole, right? I'm exaggerating what a clinical therapist would say. They wouldn't say it like that, but the result would be, it seems to be the same. It's like, oh, you've got a really good point there. Your boss is just out of line. Your coworker is threatening you. Because one of the words he used, which we'll get down to these quotes here pretty quick, is your workspace is unsafe. So something like that. So your workspace,
right.
where you're working, is you're not fully safe in it. And I'm like, wow, like what kind of danger are we talking about?
Yeah,
here?
and that's part of the challenge is talk like that. It really muddies the waters because the fact is, yes, there are situations where your workspace truly is unsafe and you should do something about it or change. There is real abuse in the world in which someone seeks to fundamentally damage you, and you're like, I got to go someplace else. But as we have pathologized everything, every possible challenge, every possible discomfort, well, then the line gets blurred between when you really should flee and leave versus when you should kind of stand and grow. And that's part of the challenge. We're not saying there aren't actual dangers and difficulties out there, but we're dealing with a world that's trying to convince you it's all that way, where even words are tantamount to actual physical blows. The quotes that I actually have from this Jonathan Alpert, I don't have from the original article that we read. He's apparently been on this topic for quite some time, and I did find a Newsweek article he wrote on the same topic back in May of 2025. So this is a Newsweek article that he wrote May 21, 2025. May 21, 2025. 2125 would be 100 years from now. And these are just kind of three to give you the sense. So here's one thing that he said. Now, again, he's focusing on therapy. We're asking you, don't just think of therapy. Think of the world around us right now. So he says, we live in an era where disagreement is treated like trauma and emotional reactions are weaponized for political gain. On social media, vulnerability is currency. On TikTok, influencer, quote, therapists dish out instant validation in 30-second bursts. The most anxious voices often hold the most influence. Complex issues get reduced into content. Millions watch, but few get better. Being, quote, in therapy has become a badge of honor. Mental health struggles have morphed into an identity, but that's not strength. We should celebrate emotional resilience, not broadcast pain for validation. And I admit, I've seen little clips of, when I say an influencer, I assume it's someone who's successful at influencing, but at least people who want to be influencers, because I don't follow them. I don't know if they're successful. And that's what they do. They're talking about their kind of pain and brokenness, but they're not really trying to help people figure out how to grow, but really they're just trying to build a community where they influence others with pain and brokenness, and they kind of calcify around that pain and brokenness. And I think it matches kind of what he's talking about. Okay, but here's another quote. He says, Mr. John Robinson's wife is a wonderful therapist. I made that part up. He didn't say that. Wow. He says, yeah, amazing, right there in Newsweek. Now, here's what he says. He says, there's a difference between openness and indulgence, between sharing to connect and oversharing to gain attention. And I'm going to insert right here that I think that's part of one of the many, many pathologies of social media, is that it's commodified something that actually can build bonds between people and turn it into a way to market yourself. And as a result, it distorts all of these kinds of things. So anyway, just continuing, he says that vulnerability should never be a tool for popularity. What used to be genuine self-expression has become performance. And while it might look like healing, it's not. And we're saying this to all of you. This is, again, me, Mr. Robinson, out there, because we don't know what you're watching on YouTube or TikTok or Instagram or whatever it is you're watching. But do keep in mind, if you're watching this kind of thing, I have known people that have gotten caught up, say, into the transgender culture because of that very thing, because of watching some people that just make them
Right.
feel validated, that your feelings, those are real and there's a community. And next thing you know, instead of growing stronger in dealing with it, they're being sucked into it, kind of more and more and more because of this obsessive validation.
Well, if you think of it this way, because that's interesting. Let's say they're doing what this author has just described, and they're doing it they're oversharing and they're sharing their vulnerability, and it's because they've embraced something like a trans identity or maybe homosexuality, and they're talking about how difficult it's been, and they're oversharing. Well, there's a principle in the Bible that we should probably emphasize more. There's a couple different ways to say it, but one of them is, don't strengthen the hand of the evildoer. And so, this kind of identity is we have to be careful with, because there's a sin these people are engaged in, and they're kind of making it be sympathetic, and then you might be a little more prone to be open to it, and it's kind of potentially headed into a direction where you would find yourself in sinful behavior.
Yeah, that is part of the what I think YouTube and others have really opened up is that used to be there was a place, and some would say, oh, but used to be these people just felt nothing but shame. Well, the fact is they still had people in their lives, right? And so who do you plug them into? But if you plug them into those who do nothing but kind of celebrate that and turn that into virtually a virtue, that possessing this difficulty is a virtue in and of itself. No, one, it shouldn't be purely just shameful to be wrestling with something. But the question is then, what do we do with that? And this culture teaches you to just kind of the wrestling not even the wrestling, the possessing of the problem is the value, not the virtue in terms of seeking to deal with it. The last quote that he has here that we'll grab from this article was this. He says, we need to rethink how we view discomfort. Pain, failure, and adversity aren't disorders. That's another thing. We kind of pathologize something as if it's kind of like if I've only been born with one leg. This is me just editorializing. Well, that's clearly something that I've been kind of burdened with and such. But he says all these things we kind of turn into something that, everything has to adapt for you. And he's like, well, no, don't think of that as a disorder. He says, and this I think is very important. In fact, we note in my notes, I've bold-faced it and underlined it. He says, speaking of pain, failure, and adversity, they're part of life and part of how character is built. That's what he says. Treating every challenge as trauma doesn't help people. It weakens them, he says. When we pathologize ordinary struggles, we rob people of the opportunity to grow stronger. Disagreement isn't an attack. Setbacks aren't mental illnesses. Life is hard, and that's okay. Now, and I like that last thing he said there, because there is this kind of illusion that somehow life shouldn't be hard. When the fact is, life is.
Right.
Life is challenging.
Yeah.
And I grabbed these from this Newsweek article about this because it was lazy and it was right there. But I know you grabbed some things from the original article that we actually read. And again, he's really focused on therapy in that. But what's that one that you grabbed that you were just telling me a while ago, which was really good?
Well, this is one of my, like as you said from the other article, but he really, I think, explains the most clearly of all what he sees as the rise of this more problematic style of clinical therapy, and then what the result has been. And he just says it in some of the plainest speech. And I thought that this, if we read
was really good. Yeah, please do.
Okay. So he says, for years, my profession has trained clinicians to elevate validation over challenge, affirmation over interpretation, and emotional fluency over the harder work of behavioral change. What has followed is the rise of grievance culture dressed up as psychological sophistication. Too many therapists now function less as clinicians than as reinforcers of the most self-protective interpretation available, teaching patients to locate the problem everywhere but themselves. This is why it kind of clicked with me more, the kind of a Cain-like mindset.
Yeah.
All right, going back to the quote. Of course, it's your boss's fault. Of course, your colleague is toxic. Of course, your ex is a narcissist. Of course, the world keeps wounding you. In this softened therapeutic frame, frustration is rarely something to examine. It's something to assign. And I thought that was just such a great way of putting it. And and it does, like, I know this is very anecdotal, but it really does seem more and more like our, of course we're from the U.S. Once again, most people know that, but that's more and more the mindset. There's not a whole lot of like the mindset of like digging deep and trying to do the best to take care of your problems. It's now, and it's gone way beyond that. Don't get me wrong, things have to be dealt with, but if you switch to a model where increasingly nothing is your fault and you can assign blame to everything around you, then you really come into a problem, which reminds me of my quote. Should I go to my quote now? It's further down in the notes.
Oh, you have another?
Well, the Jordan Peterson quote.
Oh, that one. Okay, yeah. You know what? We're coming to that. We're coming to that here pretty soon.
We'll wait.
But I'll actually mention to give some credit to a minister whom we all miss here, and that's Mr. Debar Apartian. And this is not. It's not going to sound directly related, but I will say it's a piece of advice that was given in a narrow context that I've learned to apply, or at least strive to apply more broadly. He was talking at, I think, my very first ministerial conference that I ever had gone to. It was kind of smaller. It was pastoral. But he was he said something which was kind of terrifying to hear, but I've certainly learned that it's true. He told all of us there in that conference, you will be misunderstood. You're speaking behind the lectern, you're talking to somebody in person, you're counseling, and he said it's a given at times, you can't avoid it, you're going to be misunderstood.
I just got an email like that today.
Did you? Yeah, there you go. So you're going to be misunderstood. And here's the thing. He highlighted that the moment that you kind of write it off as well, people are just going to misunderstand you. It just happens. He says you lose the ability to actually do any better. You lose the ability to have any kind of control over whether you're understood more clearly. He said on one hand, and I'm probably even saying more than he did because it's very concise, because on one hand, yeah, it's kind of a futile quest. You will never completely be perfectly understood by all of your audience. But the moment you accept that too much is the moment you let go of any ability to be understood better. And that's kind of what I say, like what he's talking about, you're talking about is, yeah, you know what? Sometimes there are just bosses that's like, man, I've got to change my job. This is just unworkable. There are those situations. But when we're surrounded by a culture that is constantly externalizing all these problems, there are ways we can just grow to deal with some of those circumstances and actually grow and blossom in the kind of character we need to in that circumstance, instead of going, well, this is toxic, I got to go someplace else. This is terrible, I got to go someplace else.
You and I have talked about this a couple of times. I think maybe I needed more work on my character than you did because I had several. But I've had either a coworker or even sometimes a boss, and I'm not talking about working here. I mean, I had a 20-year work experience outside of the church before I came work for the church.
Right.
And I've seen this a lot in other people's lives. They'll talk about it, and this is not uncommon. And that is a coworker that's just tough to deal with, or a boss that's tough to deal with. And so you think, you prayed about it a lot and it's problematic, but they're not going anywhere, and you wonder what God's doing. And he's like, I'm expecting you to work on this.
That's right.
I'm expecting you to figure out how to get along with this person. And it's so not fun, and it's difficult, and it can last years. But I know I've done it, and I've talked to other people who've done it, and there really is a real sense of accomplishment when you figure out a way. Well, it seems to be one of two ways. You figure out a way to actually get along with that person, and it doesn't mean they're not ever annoying again, but like you find a balance that works.
Find a way.
Or one day you come in, because there's a scripture that talks about it, and one day your enemy is gone and has disappeared.
And things are different.
Yeah, went to another job, just something happened, and all of a sudden they're gone out of your life. But I would assume in most cases that's an example of, you were doing your part, and you were doing, what can I do to make this better? It's really quite interesting when you really get deep into, this is why I like, have you actually named the point one here?
No, we're about to. We'll jump right to it.
Perfect. This is going to lead right into it.
All right, great.
You have to really do some deep soul searching, if I can use that phrase, occasionally, and be like, this person's so frustrating. What can I do? How can I? They're so disagreeable. You can't tell them anything, whatever. And then one day you keep working at it, and you find something that's workable, that makes the situation at least manageable.
Right. Okay, that might be the second point. I'm not sure. We'll see. Here's the first point. Oh, and it's kind of a theme or a structure to these. I thought each of these points has a key word that starts with the letter R. Why? I don't know. That's just the way it kind of turned out. So I thought I would go with it.
So point one is Robinson. Mrs. Robinson.
Okay, no, the real first point is this. Embrace. So what are we doing now? We're talking about biblical principles that we should all adopt in trying to navigate this kind of culture we're in, this kind of really bad therapy culture, if you will, this teaching you to externalize all of your problems, that you should always feel comfortable. You should never be triggered by anything. What are some biblical principles that we can use to navigate this kind of culture and to not fall into the kind of traps that this fellow is talking about? The first one is to embrace a commitment to reality. Because when you look at a lot of this culture, it's trying to convince you of a world that isn't real. I would say, again, I'm not just trying to pick on the whole transgender ideology. That's really the latest manifestation, if you will, but it is one of the most extreme manifestations in which they're trying to convince even children that they should embrace a world that is not the actual world, to the extent that they're telling them, you know what you need to do with your body is you need to let us take some scalpels and stuff and reshape your own body. Versus a culture that used to try to teach people to actually accept the bodies they have, and more resilient. Well, it might seem trite to turn here to emphasize this, but I don't think it's trite, because I don't think the Ten Commandments are ever trite. The Ten Commandments are a reflection in one form of the mind of God. And one of the Ten Commandments right there in Exodus chapter 20 and verse 16. Oh, I've got you know what? Actually, I have the King James open instead of the New King James. I'm leaving it because the thous and these give a nice heavy effect.
I like it.
So in the old King James, Exodus 20 and verse 16 says this: "Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor." And don't bear false witness. Now, that said, that's really narrow, but you understand Jesus Christ teaches us to focus on the spirit of the law. And more than that, if we're trying to grow to have the mind of God, what does a verse like this tell us? Well, one thing very plainly, it certainly talks about how we certainly shouldn't do wrong to our neighbor by bearing false witness. But there's really a broader picture there. God is called in Scripture a God of truth. Jesus Christ says he is the way, the truth, and the life. The fact is, truth matters to God in a significant way. In fact, even breaking this commandment, if you get our booklet on the Ten Commandments by Dr. Roderick C. Meredith, in that booklet, he kind of highlights the very first commandment is about how you should have no other God before me, and that all the other commandments kind of require you to violate that one sort of first. And when it comes to living a lie, you are sort of rejecting, to some extent. You're putting your fantasy about the world ahead of the world that God has either created directly or the one that he has allowed to exist. And that sometimes means looking at some hard truths. Point 2, we'll talk about discovering some of those possibly, because sometimes those are inside you. I will say this, it doesn't mean minimizing actual harms. If someone is abusing you in some kind of way, it doesn't mean pretending that's not the case. No, that is also accepting reality. But it also means not exaggerating them. We live in a world where people, I've seen it, and some of you have seen clips, where someone is trying to have a discussion, and when the other person wants to speak or say something, the other person will just literally yell, do whatever it is, so that the other person's words aren't even audible.
I tried that with Mrs. Robinson. It didn't work.
Oh, you're on a roll today, Mr. Robinson. So I'll let you get feedback from Mrs. Robinson on this episode whenever you get home.
That should be fun.
But it really is, the point where the idea that, some people, their point of view doesn't, they're not qualified for what they have to say. If you're not a transgender person, you can't comment on transgender things. Right. If you're, truth is truth, no matter who is actually saying it. And this is where I did think about, Cain. God presented Cain. I love the way you discussed Cain. For those who don't know, Mr. Robinson mentions Cain probably about 18 times a day outside. And I'm just kidding. But Cain is such a big example. Mr. Gwynn used to point people to Genesis all the time. You want to understand society today, go back and look at the founding of this society in Genesis. And you see Cain, and he had a mindset going on when his offering was not accepted. And God literally is trying to help him see reality a bit. It's like, hey, you're getting caught up in this kind of internal world. Here's what reality is. And which is going to lead us to our second point in a moment. And so before we do that, understand the first point is first you've got to be willing to commit to reality. And I'll be upfront. A lot of people don't want to know reality.
Mm-hmm.
They would rather live in a world that's filled with nothing but comfortable truths, nothing that is self-affirmations and validations. But you're going to be frustrated because reality doesn't adapt like that for us. Reality doesn't pretend to be something else. Eventually, you'll always run into reality, like actually Cain did.
I don't even know where to start. So, the Bible is not organized randomly, and so we should take note of the order of the revelation. So what is the first thing we have? In the first 3 chapters of Genesis, it's the story of really how we deceived ourselves into the garden. We allowed ourselves to be deceived, and our relationship with God suffered. And then you go next to the second story in the Bible, and it's a guy who has a mentality where he doesn't want to accept reality, and he wants to cast blame on everything around him. And so that's why you just go back to that all the time. And we all that's what you described earlier is the most fundamental definition of a narcissist. And we all have just that bit of narcissism in us where we want to. And what am I like specifically? What I'm saying is, we naturally kind of craft a bit of our own reality. We have a way we see ourselves. We have a way we see the others. It may be close to the truth. It may not be. Well, reality, that's the better way to put it. And I think one of the most important things that I will give myself some credit for it, and I'm sure I still deceive myself in many ways, but really try to look at things the way they really are. And so every year when we're commanded to examine ourselves, that I try to take that seriously, because it's so easy to every year we kind of drift away from reality and kind of get away, and we need to bring ourselves back in. Well, you've had a year to evaluate yourself. How are we doing? Are we doing more Bible study? Are we doing less Bible study? There are objective ways you can evaluate your own behavior. And this reminds me of my brother-in-law, Sean Dumoy, talks about speeches, and he thinks sometimes when people have fallen into bad habits in speech, it's like club, that's what I'm talking about. They never really got down to the first couple of the 2 most basic club speeches. It's speak with purpose. I don't even know what we call them anymore because we've changed them.
Oh yeah, I can't remember with our new spokesman club.
Right.
Yeah, but it's certainly about having a purpose in your speech.
You need to have a simple topic and explain it so simply that everybody understands exactly what you're saying. There's no ambiguity. And if you don't learn how to speak with that clarity, then as you go on and build your other speeches, you're going to always have that kind of at your foundation as a problem that's not been resolved. So as Christians, if we move forward, if we don't make a commitment to embrace reality, then we're carrying baggage with us of things we built up about how we think we are and how we think others are, and that doesn't necessarily reflect reality.
Yeah, I while you were talking there, I took the chance to look up which Bible study course is the one, which lesson is about the real origin of civilization. That's lesson 7.
Okay.
If you've been through the Bible study course, go back to lesson 7. If you haven't, you should, because it's a great Bible study course. And lesson 7 talks about the real origin of civilization, and that's when you go back and look at Genesis and see how the foundation for everything right now was laid right there at Genesis. But this idea of a commitment to reality the way it is, it's like someone having you brought this example up to me a long time ago, Mr. Robinson, in a different context, but the idea of having a broken map. And if you're trying to guide your life based on the map, and that map is off somehow, then you're just going to hit trouble after trouble after trouble, because you're using a guide to reality that is inaccurate. We have to be willing to look at reality as it is. I know in terms of health things in my life, whenever I decided it's like, okay, I've really got to lose weight. Well, part of why I did that was because I've wanted to lose weight for a long time. It's not like I didn't want to lose weight, but I just would constantly tell myself the lie. It's like, oh, I'm really going to get serious next week. And you can do that for many weeks in a row. But then I had to face reality. And that was actually saying, okay, what have I been doing? Where am I? What really is reality about the decision I'm likely to make tomorrow or the next day? And that said, what is reality probably going to be for me 3 years from now? What's reality probably going to be 5 years from now? And honestly, being willing to accept a bit of reality there. It was an ugly reality. It's not a nice one, but it was vital. So anyway, first you got to be committed to embrace reality. But once you do that, then the next R we want to talk about is reflecting. And that's being willing to reflect and examine yourself versus always externalizing 100% of every difficulty. And let me say from the very beginning, it is not that there's not external differences in the world. When Stephen the martyr was being stoned to death, you know what the problem was? It was the stones that were flying at him. Yes, sometimes really it is an external problem. But like I've often tried to say to people in different circumstances, there's never a bad time to examine yourself. There's never a bad time to look and be able to say, hey, you know, well, what could I do? And this is where Mr. Robinson remembered a key Jordan Peterson quote.
Yes. I've thought about this one many times. I think I even used it in that sermon I did about Cain. But when we're approaching, let's say we have a number of issues that are really a problem, and they're making us miserable, and we want to try to resolve it. If we go back to the author's examples of, oh, you know what, my boss is a problem, my coworker's toxic, you know, all these different external excuses, when appropriate. I appreciate your comments just now about that. But when what's your starting point? So, Dr. Peterson,
where do you begin?
Begin? So your question is naturally, is it me or is it the world? Where are these problems coming from? And he says, let's consider first that it's you. You know, you start with the idea before. Well, maybe you're not even blaming. Maybe there really is an external problem that's outside of your control that's causing you, you know, misery. But in general, it's best to start off with kind of assuming that you're more likely to have caused the problems or contributed to the problems in some ways than it is some outside external thing that you have no control over.
Right. You know, that's a challenge sometimes in talking with couples when you have a husband and wife and they're married, because that's why they're husband and wife, and it's caught in some difficulty, and you know, you recognize it's kind of the same way with children as well. I saw that with my children, is that if at least one of them would commit to doing something different, a lot of things would be better, right? But they've so externalized the sources of all the problems that the only way they can imagine it ever being improved is if the other person did all the things differently. And we see that with counseling with marriages as well sometimes. And one of the hardest things to do is to say, well, is there anything that you could do? Is there anything at all? And often because a person is consumed about what the other person, and the thing is, you're not trying to invalidate that the other person should do something differently. Mm-hmm. But it's like when it comes to the commands to husband and wife in Ephesians chapter 5, when he talks about, you know, wives should respect their husbands and husbands love their wives. It's fascinating how the command doesn't make that conditional on the other person. You know, a husband's supposed to love his wife even if he's not lovable. If she's not lovable, it doesn't say that husbands love your wives unless, you know, sometimes when she's kind of grumpy in the morning, and honestly, who could love that? Nobody could love that. No, he just says love your wife. Yep. Same thing to wives about husbands. He doesn't put conditions on that. And I was trying to use that to encourage people to say, look, I'm not trying to say that your spouse is not a source of challenge, but still what can be done? What is that in our lives? And even if the only benefit is that we grow in some way, we grow in character, we grow in patience, that's still good stuff. And that's the kind of growth it seems like that this cultural shift is trying to forestall.
I have observed that. So if I go back to a younger version of myself, you know, just being bombarded by this therapist who wants me to consider other people's point of view and stuff. Stop. And you know, put my hands in my ears. And okay, but I realized there were many times I was maybe, when I say, I'll use the word trapped, because you're not really trapped, but you feel trapped. You feel like trapped in the situation. Right. There's something going on. The other person's really a problem. And you start to kind of adapt this victim mentality a little bit. And I did it. And part of it is, this is not even something that's like, the word will come to me. You're not even aware that you're doing this. You just feel powerless. What can I do? I can't control them. They're saying this. You often have far more control than you realize. Like, I don't mean you can control the other person, but
you do have things you can control.
Like I've heard ministers say lots of times, You go back to the marriage analogy, your spouse. Yeah, you're right. You can't make them change that, but you can control how you react to it. You can control a lot more things, and that's not very fun. Nobody likes to hear that.
Right.
That they need to maybe change some things or have a different mindset in approaching it, and you feel like, oh well, great, they're just going to keep being. But you'd be surprised how often you change. That actually does have a modifying effect.
Right. I remember, this is going to be kind of a reference out of nowhere, but you told once about the former Navy SEAL Jocko talking about how someone was asking about advice, like, hey, my boss always takes credit for all my work, and I work really hard and I never get any credit. He always takes credit as if he did all by himself. Well, what should I do about that? Because it sounds like you really are trapped. And he just says, well, then you do your best, and he's got the best things in the world, to talk about. But there, you feel kind of powerless. But there is a role for you. There's still something to do, and there's actually benefits that can come from that. But the first way to recognize that is to get out of this mindset that I've got to somehow fix my external circumstances, that I'm powerless to do anything. And you do bring up, and you mentioned it here in the notes. You talk about King Saul as an example of this kind of thing, and so that could probably be the next 3 hours. But if you could give us some of that, because I always appreciate your insights about Saul.
Well, I hate to be so mean to poor Saul, but he is used okay. So we've talked many times already about how Cain is an archetypical attitude from the beginning.
Right.
It's easier for us to all fall into that and want to blame other things and not accept our own responsibility. Well, if there's a character in the Bible who the Bible says a lot about him because of the way his life overlaps with David's, he is like the prime example of somebody who's adopted that attitude of Cain. And so, without rehashing the entire story, you have Saul, who's made a series of poor decisions, and God finally says, look, I'm done with you. I'm not going to help you anymore. I'm going to replace you with somebody else. But what's crazy about this story when you first approach it is it feels like God's going to do that right away, but he's going to do that in 20 years. It seems if you put the timeline together, it's
God's
he's
timing
still,
is always
exactly.
interesting, right?
So you see Saul have more and more problems, and then old David comes along, and at first he thinks he's an ally, but then everybody starts singing about how great Jonathan is, and then I think it's immediately from that day forward, Saul sought what he could do about David, kind of thing. And it gets worse and worse. And you even have Saul's own son, Jonathan, is saying, Dad, David has done nothing. All he's done is help you. And he goes out and does everything you say. And I think Jonathan got a spear thrown at him.
Now he sees Jonathan as part of the problem. Yep.
So Jonathan finally warns David. He's like, look, gotta be honest, my dad tried to kill you. And so David is really scared, and he makes a run for it, and he goes into a situation that he shouldn't have gotten himself into. But after that, he's on the run, and Saul is coming to find him, and he gets a lead on where he thinks David is, and he catches up, and David's long gone. So he wants somebody to blame for how he's lost David. Okay.
Right.
So at this point, David has come and talked to the priest. He's gotten Goliath's sword because he left with nothing. He got the showbread, which is a whole other story.
Right.
And he's gone. So Saul catches him late. So he's going to talk to the priest here in a minute. But here there's this, you could draw a painting from the description of this right here. He's under a tree. Saul's under a tree. He's surrounded by his supporters. He's holding a spear. That spear, you guys, next time somebody's in there studying Saul, the spear is practically its own character. It's in the story so long. So here we have, and I'll just read. When Saul heard that David...
wait, where is this? Second.
This is right. 1 Samuel 22, 6, 7, and 8.
Okay.
When Saul heard that David and the men who were with him had been discovered, and then a parenthetical statement, now Saul was staying in Gibeah under a tamarisk tree in Ramah with his spear in his hand and all his servants standing about him. Okay, so then he launches into one of the best pity parties you're going to find in the Bible, coming back to verse 7. Then Saul said to his servants, and when you kind of put the whole story together, you realize I'm almost convinced that his supporters, they're all caught off guard by this characterization. Then Saul said to his servants, these are his supporters who stood about him, Hear now, you Benjamites, because Saul's a Benjamite, so it would make sense that his tribe would be his biggest supporters. I mean, David was from Judah, and he considered them, the Judah, to be his biggest supporters.
Right.
Hear now, you Benjamites, will the son of Jesse, talking about David, give every one of you fields and vineyards, and make you all captains of thousands and captains of hundreds? All of you have conspired against me, and there is no one who reveals to me that my son has made a covenant with the son of Jesse, and there is not one of you who is sorry for me or reveals to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me to lie in wait as it is this day.
Wow. There's none of you who is sorry for me. That's fascinating.
Yes. So Saul, his whole story is like this, and man, I actually had a moment where I wasn't sure what I wanted to study next, and I went back and started reading Samuel again. And it is so much you get out of it every single time.
You leave Samuel, you always end up drawn back in, it seems like. Well, hey, speaking of Samuel's, there's an opposite to that example, I think, that I find in David that I really appreciate. And I use this example a lot. And for those who've heard me use it before, please forgive me. But it is one of my favorites because there's a time when David could have taken a similar thing, but he did use an opportunity that other people would complain about. Other people would say, well, you should be feeling sorry for me. I didn't really earn all of this or deserve all this. And instead, he actually did use it for self-examination. And it was a case where the other individual was wrong. And that was where he is fleeing because of what has taken place with his son, Absalom.
Oh, yeah.
And as he is, he's there with the troops, he's kind of on the run. In 2 Samuel 16, we read in verse 5, now when King David came to Bahurim, there was a man from the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera, coming from there. He came out cursing continuously as he came. This is Shimei cursing at David. Mm-hmm. It says he threw stones at David and all the servants of King David, and all the people and all the mighty men were on his right hand and on his left. And I admit, when I think of this, I always tend to picture him looking kind of like a golem-like creature, which is just a person. He's a man, right? There's a man coming out and throwing rocks and such. It says in verse 7, also Shimei said thus when he cursed, come out, you bloodthirsty man, you rogue. The Eternal has brought on you all the blood of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. And the Eternal has delivered the kingdom into the hand of Absalom, your son. So now you're caught in your own evil because you are a bloodthirsty man. Well, then Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, this is one of his mighty men who was with him, said to the king, why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Please let me go over and take off his head. Verse 10, but the king said, what have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? So let him curse, because the Eternal has said to him, curse David. Who then shall say, why have you done so? Now, I'll pause there to highlight that Shimei truly was wrong to actually go up against the one who was clearly God's anointed and to just throw dirts and curse and besmirch. God looks terribly on that. God does not want us doing that kind of thing. And in fact, later, Shimei ends up losing his life over the whole thing. God doesn't forget about that. God does hold him accountable. And he should never have treated David that way. And David could have made a lot of excuses. He could have been like Saul, like, man, don't you guys just feel sorry for me? Look what I'm having to put up with.
Yeah.
This is how low I've been brought. And instead, he says, no. As far as I know, God has opened the door for him to be able to say these things to me. And he's meditating on the fact that his own son has wronged him.
Right.
His own son has conspired with Ahithophel to get him kicked out of his own kingdom. And he could have been externalizing all of his concerns. Woe is me. But instead, he does see it as an opportunity for self-examination. How did I come to this place, and what role did I play in it? I'm going to accept the feedback I'm being given right now and see if maybe I need to do something with
that.
this.
That really is remarkable, because as you go through and read that again, and I listen to it and think about it, David was not having a good day. Like,
he was not.
That was not a day that you're like open to more criticism.
Right.
Typically. So, pretty remarkable that he had that attitude. Yeah, you're right.
That's one of my favorites. Okay, we are kind of running out of the time we want to spend, so we're going to hit these. I think the last two here pretty quickly. The third point we wanted to mention in terms of this, you're examining yourself. Again, it may not truly be all your problem, but you might discover some of it is, and you might actually, even if it is not at all, you haven't contributed to the problem, you still have the opportunity to grow out of it. Well, grow in what direction? And one of the things, and I actually took this directly from Mr. Robinson's contribution to these notes, we kind of worked together on these, was that this is an opportunity, we should see these as opportunities to seek to develop the Christian virtue of resilience. Resilience is this ability to grow in adversity and to overcome and to adapt and to be a stronger person than you were before that. Mr. Robinson noted that you see a lot of biblical admonitions, like the Bible always encourages to endure, to grow in patience, and to grow in long suffering. He even added the phrase there, the Bible never really says it, but about emotional maturity. And it's amazing how you can think you're an emotionally mature person and then realize there's whole nother levels that you can grow into.
We had one trial that was particularly difficult when the girls were young, and I felt like I learned the meaning of long suffering. It means to suffer for a long time, because that's exactly what it felt like. But you're right, like far from being like fragile and kind of, you remember when we for a while there we had the saying micro expressions?
Yeah.
Right. So there's
microaggressions.
Microaggression.
Oh, I remember that phrase.
So that's like, that's beyond fragile. That's everything somebody else is saying to you is a microaggression. You take offense on everything. I mean,
yeah, they didn't insult you directly, but they said something that even if they don't realize it, it's aggressive. It is aggressive. It's a microaggression.
Yeah, right.
It's a small aggression. Right.
And so anyway, the Bible really counsels us to be the opposite of that and have a little bit of a sturdier
constitution.
Yeah, constitution.
Character.
Okay, that reminds me. This is real quick. I think one way you could we need to remember. In my opinion, anytime you're taking Paul's not advice, but Paul is saying something,
his admonition or something.
He's a pretty extreme guy in terms of like living his life. So like, to me, some of the things he says I would take it a little bit as like a superlative. Like he's
setting a high bar.
Yeah, very high bar. He's kind of an extreme version of that. But he encountered a whole lot of difficulty, and if he'd taken some of this clinical therapist advice about blaming everything else, he would never been
preach the gospel at all.
And here he is, having endured a great amount of persecution and like physical pain, and he talks about that in other areas. But we find in Philippians 4 verse 11, here's what he says: "Not that I speak in regard to need, for I have learned in whatever state I am to be content. I know how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I have learned both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." And man, what a like I can every once in a while I feel like I can see that. I'm not saying that that's where I'm at. In fact, the older I get and the softer I get here in this cushy American life, I kind of wonder. But he really was in a situation in his life was like, hey man, when things are going great, I celebrate and I know how to have nice things, but man, when life gets tough and we're skipping meals and I'm getting shipwrecked every 15 minutes and I got chains on me, whatever the situation he was in, to him, and again, remember, he's more of an extreme example. Like to him, that was I can rely on Christ, and I'm also an example for Christ. And what greater calling is that? But that doesn't mean that was fun. He just learned how to cope with the situation he was in.
Mr. Robinson, what a fantastic citation. I remember Mr. Rand Millich, regional pastor there in the Kansas City area, who trained me and was my first regional pastor, him highlighting that same passage. And I remember hearing him use it in counseling, and he and I have discussed it as well, that Paul literally right there says he learned those things. He's not saying he was born with this kind of resilience and such. He says, I've learned to do this. I've learned to do that. And that's what we're really talking about. Seek to develop this. Don't expect it to be kind of a gift. Don't just say, I don't have it. In James chapter 1, verses 2 and 3, it's one of these things where the writer seems to say something. It seems ludicrous, but you've got to understand what he's saying. James 1, verse 2, he starts there and says, James writes, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials." It's like, oh, good, I'm suffering, yay. He's not saying be deluded and treat it like a party, but yet there is an element of joy you actually can have. We do have an article, by the way, coming out September, October in the Living Church News for members of the Living Church of God from Dr. Fall, I think, talking about joy. It should be very good, help you have a right perspective on joy. But he says, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. And let patience have its perfect work, he says in verse 4, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. The fact is, God allows difficulties in our life, and if he did not, we would not grow in all the ways that we need to grow. God didn't call us to get rid of all of our problems. He called us to give meaning to our problems and to give us better problems. We have been called to a life that is going to have difficulty, but that difficulty becomes an opportunity to grow in the ways God wants us to. Now, that said, it is not saying there aren't times to get up and get out of Dodge.
Yep.
When Christ is talking to the disciples in Matthew 10, in verse 23, he says, hey, they persecute you in one city, flee to the next city. He doesn't just stay and die.
David didn't stay there and wait for Saul to kill him.
That's exactly right. But if we take that kind of thing, that mentality about, well, I've been wronged, I got to go someplace else. If we turn that into thinking that we have some kind of right to live in a world where we're never going to be challenged, where we're only validated, where we're never going to be uncomfortable, then you are on a fool's errand. You will not find a place on this earth like that. There has to be a desire as well to develop resilience and to grow through circumstances and not be quick to say, I don't deserve this, I shouldn't have to put up with it. Well, you know what? Maybe you don't deserve it. Maybe you don't deserve it. But maybe learning to put up with it is actually the better choice,
right?
Because going to a place where you only get what you deserve, not only you're not going to find it, and then you might find getting what you deserve isn't always the best thing either. Well, while we're at the top of the hour, we'll just kind of wrap up here with the last item.
Right.
The last
so what you're saying is, no matter what, don't try to get any help and just handle everything on your own, right?
That's the evil point 4. That's not the real point 4. The last R is to reach out, but reach out wisely. None of this, we've already said at the beginning, but it's important to wrap up in this way because this is some place in which we also need to grow. None of this is meant to discourage you from reaching out for help when you believe you need help. It's the opposite of that. We want to encourage you to do that. But when you do reach out wisely. What is your goal for reaching out? Hopefully a part of that goal is growth, not just reach out for validation, not just reach out to have someone tell you that you're in the right and that you're, a special flower and that you should never experience any kind of harm, but also reaching out for help in terms of growing. And then also, don't forget those people that God has given to you to whom you should reach out. Your family, the ministry, mature and honest, not just your friends. There's those friends that almost exist only to pat us on the back, but your mature and honest friends. And I felt pressed to bring this kind of up because we were talking earlier about these apps that you can get. And I know, especially when you're young and feeling vulnerable, an app can be so tempting because there's a distance there. The person doesn't actually know you. You don't have to worry about feeling vulnerable. You can just talk to a stranger, and sometimes it's easier to talk to a stranger. But at the same time, the shepherds that God has given you in your life often aren't such people. Now, that said, there may be a need for professional help, but all the more,
Right.
Don't you need trusted people in your life to help you evaluate that for your sake? The Bible says in more than one place, at least 3 places, it talks about the benefit of a multitude of counselors. And God has often given us a multitude of counselors, and you should seek them out and ask them for their insight.
Right. You kind of emphasized this already, but I feel again, it's like it needs to be a truly trustworthy source.
Yeah.
Like it needs, because you might have to be open a little more than you really want to be.
Right.
And I know occasionally some people go to the other side and are too open with everyone about everything, but just a trustworthy source, and it can be a big relief because then, you could view this ironically, although to me these things are not inconsistent. One of the other things that Dr. Peterson talked about in his clinical therapy work was sometimes people come in and they have a lot of problems, and they're genuinely problematic problems, if I could say that. And his answer after hearing their list of difficulties they're coping with, maybe it's things like they have a parent in hospice care that they're dealing with, all these things. And he says, oh yeah, well, you know what? That's pretty bad. That's no wonder you're feeling, kind of down or depressed or whatever. Like there are things. And sometimes you need somebody to go, oh yeah, no, I can see why you're struggling with that. That's as bad as you think it is. That's true. But then people sometimes, he says, are often relieved that they're not just, it's because they're afraid they're they're maybe not resilient enough, they're not strong enough, and it's really getting to them. But then somebody says, "Oh no, man, I would be down in the dumps too if I was having all that happening to me at the same time."
Right. And so that we're not trying to say that that is not something that needs to happen every once in a while. You often do it. Say you have parents in your life, or, even children. As I'm, here in my 50s and my children are adults, I find leaning on them here and there actually is really helpful, or mentioning something and opening up to them. And sometimes you need that person who will do that. But when they're actually invested in us and they're wise, they often don't just seek to just validate us and just say, man, that is really rough. You're in a really difficult spot. Yep. But then they also want to help us grow to be able to meet the challenge, or they want to help us find the kind of help we need to bear the challenge, as opposed to just simply kind of wallow in a place that leaves us feeling nothing but a continued fragility and inability to actually do what the occasion might call for us.
Well, because sometimes, the world is triggering.
Yeah, we are in a triggering world. That's correct.
But we can't. Christ even says, we're not supposed to move. Remove ourselves from the world. We have to be in the world, and then that's part of the training ground. But it should be so that we form more resilience. That's such a good word, I think, to describe it. It doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. It doesn't mean that you're not having a real difficulty, but it will hopefully strengthen us over time.
Right. And so we hope these points will help. This culture is trying to convince you to just completely wallow in a certain kind of a victimhood and such that will leave you just not growing. Nothing we're saying is trying to say ignore reality, and nothing that we're saying is trying to say that something doesn't need to be done. But at the same time, in a world that is giving you poisonous, broken counselors and bad advice, the Bible actually has some very helpful things to say, because there often is a healthy path to take, and you don't want to be distracted from that by those that were trying to get you into the world's dysfunction.